Hey, what's up, APUSH peeps? This is your boy Adam Norris here with Key Concept 2.2 for you today. This one is updated, the most up-to-date video you will find on Key Concept 2.2. Alright, let's take a look and see what it says. The British colonies participated in political, cultural, and economic exchanges with Great Britain that encouraged both stronger bonds with Britain and resistance to Britain's control. I don't know about you, that is screaming to me changing continuity. And that is something that AP really wants you to understand. What changed during a time period and what remained the same. So the colonists in Great Britain encouraged stronger bonds. So exchanges encourage stronger bonds. That's going to be the continuity. But it also encouraged resistance, and that's going to be the change. So keep that in mind as we watch this video. So some big ideas. How did the colonists begin to develop an identity during this time? What impact did religion have on the colonies? And why did slavery develop in the British colonies? You should know that already, a little bit at least, from Key Concept 2.1 with Bacon's Rebellion. And furthermore, how did Africans resist their conditions? Okay, let's take a look at 2.2. Roman numeral 1. Transatlantic commercial, religious, philosophical, and political exchanges led residents of the British colonies to evolve in their political and cultural attitudes as they became increasingly tied to Britain and one another. So we're going to see more interdependence here among the colonies and Britain. So we see the emergence of diverse religious and ethnic groups, Catholics, especially in Maryland with the Maryland Acts of Toleration, which granted religious tolerance to Christians only, and it was aimed at protecting Catholics. The Quakers in Pennsylvania and Puritans in New England. So we have Lord Baltimore, who is the famous Catholic, William Penn, the Quaker, and John Winthrop, the Puritan. So pluralism, what is pluralism? Well, it's this idea that multiple groups are existing together at the same time. It will also lead to intellectual exchange from different European groups. So not just England will ideas be coming from in regards to Europe, but also other areas, the areas of present-day Germany as well. Pennsylvania will see a lot of immigrants coming from that area. Now, these diverse religious and ethnic groups are going to be strengthened by the First Great Awakening. People like this dude, George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards, who happened to be the grandfather to Vice President Aaron Burr, who shot and killed Alexander Hamilton in 1804. Now, this is going to lead to an increase in conversions of First Great Awakening and new branches of Christianity as well. I have a video in the description that goes in much more detail about the First Great Awakening, but the big idea, people are being brought back to religion and more conversions and new branches of Christianity. This will lead to questioning of authority. Also, the Enlightenment is occurring in Europe, and this leads to the questioning of government. People like John Locke write about natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and Montesquieu writes about separation of powers. Want to know how I remember Montesquieu? Montesquieu, that's 3 syllables. Separation of powers, 3 words. So letter B, how did the British colonies experience Anglicization? Everybody circle for me Anglicization, especially my students. This means using more English norms and customs. Now, this is going to happen over time. Well, it does so by colonial governments were based on English models, so the government structure is based on England. We'll have frequent contact with Britain via the transatlantic print cultures. So ideas are being spread from England all the way over to the Americas, especially via trade and newspapers. And we're going to have the spread of Protestant evangelicalism. Again, this idea of the First Great Awakening. George Whitefield, he's originally from England. He and others come across the Atlantic to the colonies to spread their message and encourage conversion in new branches of Christianity. The British sought to increase control of its colonies through its pursuit of mercantilism, and mercantilism is important to know. It's the idea that the colonies exist for the benefit of the mother country, and when there were conflicts with colonists and natives, this would lead to erratic or inconsistent enforcement. Britain sought to limit colonial expansion to limit conflict with natives, and we'll see this especially after 1763 at the end of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. Also, the Navigation Acts. This required colonists to export specific goods only to England, like tobacco, or English colonies. And whether it was tobacco or fur or other goods, the colonists were only expected to trade with Britain and its colonies. And the colonists will eventually try to get around this, and they will do so by smuggling. The Dominion of New England combined Massachusetts with the rest of New England and later New Jersey and New York, and this was a way for England to try to gain more control over the colonies. And assemblies were eliminated, and a new governor was appointed, Sir Edmund Andros. He was incredibly unpopular. He eventually is going to be overthrown. He's going to try to escape America by dressing as a woman, but he is caught. So these are different attempts of Britain trying to increase control of its colonies via mercantilism. Colonial resistance to the British stemmed from a bunch of different ideas, including colonial self-government, the idea that colonists, mostly white landowning men in most cases, were able to vote for colonial representatives. However, they had no say in parliament, so colonists could not vote for members of parliament. Ideas of liberty, again from the Enlightenment time period, these ideas are very popular, and colonists saw themselves as British and wanted the same rights as their British counterparts. The Enlightenment challenged traditional ideas of government, and this would encourage limiting the power of government, whether it's through checks and balances or different ways of limiting the power of a central government. Religious independence and diversity is also occurring, and the First Great Awakening challenged traditional church authority, and this would lead to challenging of authority in other areas as well, especially the government. So some people argue the First Great Awakening is kind of a forerunner to the American Revolution. And there's also perceived corruption in the imperial system or in the imperial government. So corrupt rulers like Sir Edmund Andros in the Dominion of England that we just talked about, he eliminated colonial assembly. So there's this idea that, you know what, maybe these people who are in charge in government are kind of corrupt and don't have the colonial best interests at heart. And there is Sir Edmund Andros. Key concept 2.2 Roman numeral 2. Like other European empires in the Americas that participated in the Atlantic slave trade, the English colonies developed a system of slavery that reflected the specific economic, demographic, and geographic characteristics of those colonies. So why did all the British colonies participate in the slave trade to some degree? It's not just the South initially that participates. There's large amounts of farmland everywhere, and there's a high demand in Europe for colonial goods. Again, tobacco. I can't stress enough how important tobacco was. There was a very large market for it and an opportunity for people to make lots of money. There's also a shortage of indentured servants, especially after Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. And that's really going to make many plantation owners want a more permanent source of labor. So where was slavery found in the British colonies? I just mentioned it was found pretty much everywhere. Well, in New England, small farms had some slaves. Port cities in the north and the south would have slaves that would be working, so any cities that were involved heavily in trade. And plantations, especially in the Chesapeake, which is Maryland and Virginia, don't forget, and the south, areas like North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Now, most of the slaves were living in the south, but there were some in all the British colonies. And most African slaves were sent to the Caribbean, to the West Indies, to work on sugar plantations. So what's the impact of slavery in the South? Well, we have the emergence of a strict racial system. There's prohibition of interracial relationships. Again, you could contrast that with the Spanish colonies, where the British did not really allow interracial relationships, whereas the Spanish colonies did. Children of mothers that were slaves were enslaved, so it didn't matter who the father was. If the mother was a slave, her children would automatically be slaves. So that helped define who slaves were. Africans resisted slavery and sought to maintain some levels of autonomy. Again, autonomy means like self-rule or independence, and they did so through family, culture, and religion. And we're also going to talk about how Africans resisted slavery. So they did so overtly through rebellion. A famous rebellion in 1739 just outside of Charleston, South Carolina, was the Stono Rebellion, in which slaves revolted. They killed many whites, and they tried to flee to Spanish-held Florida. They also rebelled or resisted slavery covertly, doing things more discreetly, like breaking tools, running away, working slowly, faking illness. And Africans maintained levels of autonomy by family structures that were created, like surrogate families for slaves that were sold. So they would have friends on other plantations look after slaves that were sold. Culture, there's this emergence of a new language and music. Music was very influential and very important for slaves. And religion, that we would see the emergence of new religions that combined elements of African religions with Christianity. These are all ways that Africans sought to maintain autonomy in their situation. All right, so let's go over to some test tips for multiple choice of short answer. Definitely know the impact of the Enlightenment in the First Great Awakening. What were the goals of mercantilism and colonial economic goals? How did they differ? Reasons for the growth of slavery and its impact. For essay questions, definitely be familiar with the reasons for the growth of slavery and its impact as well, including ways Africans resisted their plight or their really tough situations, and change the continuity of British imperial control with relations with the colonies, what we talked about at the beginning of this video. All right, I'm going to leave you with a short answer question. The late 17th and early 18th century saw a rise in African slave labor in the British colonies. A. Briefly explain one reason for the rise of African slavery in the British colonies. B. Briefly explain one impact for the rise of African slavery in the British colonies on Africans. And C. Briefly explain one way African slaves resisted slavery. Remember, each part, A, B, and C, must be at least 2 to 3 sentences. That's 2 to 3 sentences for A, 2 to 3 for B, 2 to 3 for C. If you want some potential answers to this question, check out the description below. And I look forward to seeing you guys right back here for Key Concept 3.1, where we'll talk about Ben Franklin. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And check out APUSHreview.com. Every Monday, I will have a new short answer question for you to prepare for your test. Thank you guys very much for watching, and have a good day.